Hello. Dreams. Where does the mind go when we sleep? How do our thoughts and desires shape what we see when we're unconscious? In Hollow Knight, this question is answered quite literally. The dream realm, an eternal plane of existence beneath, or rather layered behind, our own. Arguably, some of the most important moments in the game happen inside this hidden realm. Each of the dreamers are hidden here. The Nightmare Heart's ritual is ended here, and it's even the only reason Radiance was able to infect the minds of Hallownest's denizens. On Silksong's release, I was especially interested to see what, if anything, they would carry over from the first game. Especially when focusing the story on an active participant rather than a passive observer, Team Cherry had to be careful about what was present from the last game. They make it clear that Silksong takes place hundreds, if not thousands of years in the future, with Hornet only saying she does not come from this land when asked about her origins. For how monumental the events in Hallownest were, they're very sparingly mentioned, but something else was missing entirely. What happened to the dreams? From what we know, dreams can take different shapes. They can bend and be molded depending on the strength of will of the bug, but they certainly never die. Let's take a deeper dive into the dream realm, answering some unanswered questions and discovering its fate in the kingdom of Farloom. Hope you enjoy. As always, hi, I'm Cactus. I release weekly videos on Hollow Knight and Silksong. If you like challenge runs, mini documentaries, or masochistic gaming content in general, you should subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. And if you'd like to see any of these shenanigans performed live, you could also follow my Twitch. I'm live every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 12 a.m. CST. It's super cozy, and I'd love to see you there. Anyways, to begin, we need to explain just what the Dream Realm entails. Like I said, it's a somewhat spiritual plane of existence beneath our own, filled with the memories of all bugs, alive or dead. Normally, it's inaccessible, but the Moth tribe, born from the Radiance's light, created a special talisman to cut through the veil, allowing its wielder to access the Dream Realm at will, depending on the bug it's used on. The knight is first thrust into the Dream Realm against their will, trapped there by the three dreamers in an attempt to maintain the seals they placed themselves under. Unbeknownst to them, the knight had a little help. Whether out of pity or remorse for their past actions, or perhaps the seer thinks the knight is the wielder of dreams their tribe once spoke of.
What a terrible fate they visited upon you. Will you accept their judgment and fade slowly away? Or will you take the weapon before you and cut your way out of this sad, forgotten dream?
Through this dialogue, we learn a few important things. A normal person cannot survive in the Dream Realm for an extended period of time, and the dream is endless. But what was that other line they said? Will you cut your way out of this sad, forgotten dream? When the knight enters a dream in-game, it's always done by using the dream nail on a bug with a strong will or presence, or an object with a historic past. So, whose dream are we in? While it could be written off as a blanket realm, I think it goes deeper than that. I think this is the dream of the seer. Let me explain. The dream realms we see in Hallownest take form in relation to the entity or thing you dream-nailed to enter. Each of these separate realms are somewhat molded by their creators, subconsciously or otherwise. Failed Champion's Arena seems to be based on the Forgotten Crossroads, Soul Tyrant's Arena looks exactly like his room from Soul Sanctum, and Nightmare King Grimm's dream is home to the Nightmare Heart, which we'll come back to later. And Bretta's dream is, well, you get the idea. But past the architecture, notice the color palettes of each dream. Each dream is colored somewhat in relation to the character as well. The Soul Tyrant's dream is a muted purple, a color associated with ambition, power, and wisdom. That's pretty much the Soul Master to a T, having spent the last of his days attempting to solve the infection via his own means, that being the experimentation of soul, despite the protest from the Pale King. Failed Champion's dream is a light blue, which can be read as serenity, reliability, and responsibility. Failed Champion only exists due to the Grub wanting the power to protect his brothers. When he finally achieved the strength he desired, he felt his problems had been solved, and he could finally step into the role of protector. As a last example, Bretta's dream is a deep magenta, a color associated with emotional balance, nonconformity, and spiritual awakening. I mean, go off, Queen, I guess. Anyways, the point being that the color of the dream denotes the aspects or represents the owner of said dream. So, what color do we see prominently throughout the Forgotten Dream? A muted pink, the color of essence, and associated with the ideas of innocence, peace, and tranquility. Now you may say, hey, the Moth tribe may be chill, but they don't really embody any of those aspects. However, I am more inclined to believe that this color doesn't represent the Moths themselves, but rather the dream realm from a time before. You see, once upon a time, the dream realm consisted of two halves, dreams and nightmares. Each of these realms had a higher being to represent them, the Radiance for dreams, and the Nightmare Heart for nightmares. At some point, the realms split, with each half becoming its own separate realm. Then, sometime after, the Radiance created the Moth tribe from its light, said to be brighter than even essence itself, and gave the tribe the power to shape dreams. What better color to represent a species with such a specific ability than pink, the beings created to be masters over the realm of dreams? After using the Dream Nail to cut through the dream back into reality, attempting to Dream Nail the Seer again rewards you with this line.
What are you doing, poking about in a dusty old mind like mine? Nothing of worth is hidden inside, believe me.
And remember, she also called the place a sad, forgotten dream. Later on, we discover the fate of the Moth tribe, having turned their back on their progenitor to worship the Pale King, and then being killed off as a result. In a way, they are, in part, responsible for the infection. We come to learn of the Seer's remorse, so why should she feel anything for a dream that reminds her of her and her people's past mistakes? But that only applies to the dream half of the dream realm. Whatever happened to the nightmares? Shadows dream of endless fire, flames devour and embers swoop. One will light the nightmare lantern, call and serve in Grimm's dread troop. The journal entry for Troop Master Grimm is a poem written by the Seer, and is one of the only glimpses we get into the nightmare realm. Supposedly, the nightmare realm consists of all negative emotions and memories of countless kingdoms of dead bugs. While the Radiance feeds off the devotion and worship of bugs, the Nightmare Heart has other means of obtaining its sustenance. The troop can only travel to a kingdom once one of their nightmare lanterns are lit, placed by acolytes of the heart in the real world. In the same way the Godseekers were brought to Hallownest by the light of the Pale King, so too is the Grimm troop guided by the flames of their lantern. As a side note, there's this secret room in the Grimm troop's tent with a wire contraption that glows with a protective seal when a spell is cast nearby. In the game's files, the structure is called a chart, but whether it tracks kingdoms they've already ransacked or is more of a star chart to guide them is unclear. But Brum has this dialogue if dream-nailed while he's in the tent.
When flame burns bright inside one's mind, kin heed the call, across lands and time.
A very mysterious line, considering if you dream-nail Grimm after his first fight, he makes a comment on the worm. So either the Pale King is so immeasurably old that he had met the Grimm troop in another time or kingdom, or the Grimm troop's travels through the Nightmare Realm have some sort of timey-wimey effect. Anyways, in order for the Nightmare Heart to be prolonged, the ritual must be completed. Once the knight obtains the Grimm child, or perhaps even when the troop first enters the kingdom, the Grimmkins set out to coalesce the negative memories of the kingdom into flames, and the knight must defeat them to obtain the flame for the ritual. On the third round of collections, you can meet Brum in Beast's Den. who will have this to say about your task.
The red flame I've gathered from this dead kingdom. You would claim it for our master, for his final act. The ritual plays itself out once more. We are like the notes in an old song, you and me. Endless, repeating songs of sacrifice, of servitude. For the ritual, for the troop, for the master. Even this child was born into invisible chains. It is done. And yet, a song that never ends is no song at all. Perhaps, together, we can banish that livid flame and let this dead kingdom rest in peace.
Whatever the Grimkin are doing to the deceased bugs of Hallownest, it clearly is some sort of profane act. Perhaps Brum finally sees the heart for what it truly is, or perhaps he's tired of seeing dead kingdoms desecrated even further. Regardless, if you follow him to the Howling Cliffs, he says this.
It is painful to defy the master, but our harvest, it profanes this dark, quiet kingdom. Now, let us destroy the anchor and banish the master. Never shall he return here again. Master, are even you a slave? If so, let our chains be broken together.
I used to think that this was straight up destroying the Grim Troop, starving the Nightmare Heart, and putting a stop to the ritual for good. However, everything we've seen so far is telling me this isn't the case. Whatever happens to Brum after this is a mystery. If the simple act of defying Grim is painful on its own, what happens when the troop is cast back to the Nightmare Realm? Is Brum punished for eternity in what is essentially bug hell? After banishing the troop, an NPC with a striking resemblance to Brum, named Nim, appears in Dirtmouth. Perhaps the heart cast Brum out of the Nightmare Realm so he wouldn't deign to stop another ritual from being completed. But I like to think that since Brum at least showed some care towards his master, via the line about him wondering if Grim is also a slave, that Grim would somewhat feel the same way about him, and so casted him out of the troop for his own good, so the eternity of torture awaiting him would never come to be. One thing's for sure. Thanks to what we know about the longevity and tenacity of the Nightmare Heart, I wouldn't be surprised if there were perhaps a Nightmare Lantern waiting somewhere in the far reaches of Farloom, waiting for another unsuspecting victim to continue the eternal dance. Another question I had relating to the Dream Realms is how the Dreamers fit into all this. There's so much we're not told about what the Dream Realm precisely entails and how it functions, but we can at least see its effects in-game and make an educated guess. Like I just mentioned, the bugs of Hallownest turning their backs on the Radiants was the inciting incident that would eventually lead to the infection, but how exactly? It's implied that everyone in the kingdom had long forgotten about the Radiants entirely until one measly bug looked upon the statue at the peak of Hallownest and remembered. As the seer said, kingdoms may fall, but dreams never die. But why was this the thing that let the Radiants slip into the cracks? How does an infection pass through dreams? We actively see Myla get possessed during the events of the game, but we never see them actually fall asleep. So perhaps in some way, the Dream Realm more directly affects the real world than we think. Kind of like Psychonauts or Inception. Anyway, we're never explicitly told how the infection spread, only how it was dealt with. The Pale King sought to make a being partly out of void, a matter that's basically the antithesis to existence, to contain the Radiants. To keep the vessels safe from the outside world, he sought to lock them away. However, no ordinary lock would suffice. We're not told exactly how the Seal of Binding functions, only that it takes 3 incredibly powerful beings to keep it shut tight. But how does their mere presence in the Dream Realm connect to a physical seal in the real world? We see them have influence on events in Hallownest. At the very least, they're still able to prevent any do-gooders who would seek to break open the seal. But how do these two things connect? All higher beings and a few powerful bugs are at least able to influence the dream realm in some way. Heck, the Pale King made his entire palace disappear into the dream realm when all hope was eventually lost. I think the magical properties of the Weaver's Silk, mixed with the Pale King's ability to influence dreams, created a hybrid item of sorts, drawing off of power from the dream realm, like the Radiance or the Nightmare Heart, to power a physical lock. However, he couldn't access the power of either halves of the dream realm, so he had to improvise. It took the sacrifice of the 3 greatest members of his kingdom, but he finally had his lock and key. Now, it's unclear exactly how this lock functions. I mean, it's still unbreakable even if weakened to only a single dreamer, but perhaps it's more of a binary situation. If it's receiving dream energy, it remains locked. It's also unclear how they're combating the Radiance while in said dream. The astute lore lovers among you may have noticed that each time you slay a dreamer, a sun rises higher in the sky in the background of the following dreams. Perhaps the Radiance is slowly gaining back its influence as the lock on the Black Egg Temple weakens? We can't know for sure. Speaking of locks, let's focus back on the Seal of Binding. How does the seal crafted by the Weavers have the power to keep the Radiance in check? What does the Kingdom of Farloom have to do with the Dream Realm? Actually, come to think of it, we don't see any dreams in Silksong at all, per se. Obviously, the Dream Realm was going to have less of an impact in Silksong's story, as it's not like Hornet would also be the chosen wielder of the Dream Nail. The lore MacGuffin in this game is the Needlin, which compels people to sing about their thoughts and desires? It doesn't really make much sense. I suppose music is a pretty strong theme in the game, especially when you consider that's the only way they've been able to keep Grandmother Silk asleep for this long, but I think we need to try and put 2 and 2 together. Let's look at the parallels between the games. A higher being is spurned by their creation, eventually being sealed away. From this sealed away state, the higher being uses their powers to infect or control the denizens of their kingdom, until they can finally make their return to power. But the Radiance does this through their control over the Dream Realm, and Grandmother Silk doesn't have that effect, right? This is where I think we were wrong. Dreams do exist in Farloom, and we see them all over the place. Remember, it's not just living beings that can exude enough force to have a dream realm or thoughts to be interpreted, but objects and corpses as well. And what exactly does Hornet get all of her skills from? Statues imbued with the hopes and wishes of her distant relatives, the Weavers. In fact, each time you gear up to absorb their power, they literally speak to Hornet. Not only this, but each of the 3 times Hornet absorbs a Silk Heart, she's thrust into this memory sequence, where it's theorized that the person talking directly to Hornet is Grandmother Silk. We already know that higher beings and even bugs of strong enough will can control and use the power of the dream world. So why wouldn't it be the same for GMS? I think that these memory sequences are no memories at all, but instead, the Silk Heart is such a concentrated form of Grandmother Silk's essence that Hornet is temporarily pulled into Grandmother Silk's dream realm. She is completely asleep, after all, made to be dormant by design. The same thing happens when you try to absorb the First Sinner. The power and hatred that First Sinner feels towards Grandmother Silk is so strong that Hornet is unknowingly transported into a memory sequence for the fight, going through the entire lore cutscene at the end to learn the truth about the Weavers. As one final bit of evidence to support this theory, I want to point towards our protagonist, Hornet. There are many parallels in the story beats between these 2 games, but perhaps the most damning of them all is the birthplace equivalent, the Red Memory. Hornet is tasked with collecting hearts of the past kingdom's 3 most powerful residents to use their power to enter her own dream realm, like the knight did in the birthplace. Remember what we talked about with the dream realms earlier. Each of the separate realms we enter in Hollow Knight is a direct translation of the character's wants and desires, the things that make them who they are. And what do we see when we enter the Red Memory? Several key moments from Hornet's life, having happened hundreds of years ago at this point, but they are so core to who she is as a person, they cannot be erased. Dreams don't die, after all. Without some more details, it's impossible to know every intricacy the Dream Realm has to offer, but it's always been such an interesting topic to me that I knew I had to make a video on it eventually. Whatever Seer of Sorrows brings us, whenever it drops, it's nice to know that the Dream Realm is alive and well even so many years later. I had nowhere else to put this in the video, but the Dream Realm is very reminiscent of an idea in a sci-fi series I read called the Hyperion Saga, in which there's a realm beyond our existence that contains the sum of all dead humans' emotions, /memories, /experiences, that's being used like a battery by a ruling sect of evil AIs. So in this case, the AIs are the Grim Troop. I don't think I've heard Team Cherry say this was an inspiration behind the idea, but it's still cool to see the parallel, nonetheless. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little jaunt through the kingdoms of Hollow Knight. It's my first time dipping my toe into lore videos, and I have a couple more ideas I'd like to make, so let me know what you think. Also, what's your take on the Dream Realms? Were there any details you think I got wrong or missed? Leave a comment. I love reading them, and I'm always open to new ideas. Thanks for watching.